The full guide of Spinning Surge or Raid Captain Surge is finally here. And if you remember, almost 2 months ago, I presented the idea and the build, but I never made like a full guide on it, simply because I needed to try it first. Like the idea sounded really cool, the damage looked promising back then. The only thing that was left is to play it myself, and I remember I told you guys that I was going to swap completely from Cursed Doll. And yes, I sold my Cursed Doll build that I spent months to get the best in slot, so I can get Raid Captain build instead. And it was definitely worth it. And now that I have all the experience with it, I know all the pros and the cons, I can finally make a full in-depth guide. Let's start first by the most important thing. This build is difficult to play than any other meta build. So if you're a new player and you really like the idea and the build, I would advise you to play 4x3 first and just save your gold till you get full experience with the class, then you can play it. Since you're not gonna be using Dark Axle for mobility anymore or for escape basically. You're gonna be using it for damage. So this is a riskier playstyle. So the engraving setup is normal. It's just like basic stuff: Grudge, Ambush, Raid Captain, Surge, and Adrenaline. For the gems, it's just basic Surge gems. The only difference is that most Surge players would have Earth Cleaver damage instead of Dark Axle cooldown here. I have Dark Axle cooldown since we're gonna be using it for damage. So you're gonna swap out the Earth Cleaver damage gem or whatever other gem you have, and you put Dark Axle instead of it, cooldown. And obviously the rest of the gems are the core Surge gems, so you don't need to change any of them. And for the tripod, they are the normal Surge tripod. If in case like you don't know what Surge tripod are, just copy these. I'm gonna go over like normal ones first, and then I would go over like the most important one for this build. So here are like the tripods for wind cut, for spin cutter, here for dark axle, here for soul absorber, here for earth cleaver, then maelstrom, blitz rush, and void strike. So all of these are basic surge tripod except one, which is quick pace in dark axle, which we'll be using to get the max movement speed, since you know with Raid Captain you have no other way of maxing your movement speed except for quick pace on the Dark Axle. So we would be using Dark Axle for surging, and for the major skills like Blitz Rush and Soul Absorber, we would use the Dark Order on Maelstrom. So you would use this to max the movement speed and to max damage for Blitz Rush and Soul Absorber. And then for Surge, you're gonna use Quick Pace of Dark Axle. For the runes, you're gonna have Tailwind, like this is basic runes, just copy them. The only difference would be is that you might have something else here on Maelstrom. The reason I have Rage is because recently I did a vykas boss, so when you're solo bossing with no support, you're not going to be able to max the damage of Soul Absorber and Blitz Rush, because you would be missing the 10% from the support set. However, you're gonna be fine with Dark Axle. You're still gonna max the movement speed, but the only issue would be Blitz Rush and Soul Absorber, since without the support you would only have 30% extra movement. So what you will do is have a like a Rage Rune on a Maelstrom, and every time it procs before Soul and Blitz Rush, it's basically extra boosting damage. So this is one of the first cons of this build, that without a support set, you're not going to be able to max damage of your major skills. So you can say you're only going to use like 66% of Raid Captain potential, not the full potential. So let's talk about the rotation. The rotation would be the same for almost every boss. The only difference would be at the last part of the rotation before surging. It will depend on what type of raid are you playing. I'm gonna explain that later, but first let me show you the rotation. But the start is always basic. You start with wind cut, spin cutter, wind cut into earth cleaver. And then here you use void strike. And after void strike you use maelstrom into like soul absorber. into Blitz Rush and Spin Cutter before for the back attack synergy, and then you use Dark Axle and you Surge. So this is how your rotation going to be for bosses that are not mobile, bosses that don't move a lot. That's why you're going to use the other tripod of Dark Axle. This one, this tripod is the one that make you still in place, because the other one make you dash over the boss. So you don't want to be using that against a boss that doesn't move a lot. However, with bosses that are mobile, you're going to be using this one, because if the boss moves a lot, let's say you're about to finish your rotation and you're playing against vykas and she teleports here, for example, then like this tripod would be completely like the other one. This one would be completely useless to you since you're not gonna reach vykas, or more like you're not gonna reach the back of vykas. However, with the other one, you can easily like dash behind her and surge her. So basically, against mobile bosses, you're gonna use this one that give you higher distance, and for bosses that don't move a lot, you're gonna use the one that stays still. Now I know one of the question would be, what if you go into Vykas playing with this tripod that give you long distance, and then she does not move or she stays still and you have 20 stacks? What should you do? If the boss is stood still and you're playing with this tripod, it doesn't mean you're gonna troll your surge. Don't worry about that. You still have like a way to surge with it. And there are two ways. So the first one, if the boss is dead still, not moving, you can see if I dash behind and then I surge, it still reaches the boss. Let's say the boss is just moving around in small space. He's like, he's technically in his place, he's just moving or turning. What you would want to do in that case is that at the end of your rotation, the boss is moving or turning, you would want to always follow him with Spin Cutter. So you know the last ticks you do with Spin Cutter for synergy, you're not gonna use him behind the boss like this. You're actually going to do this. And then you go back behind the boss and you surge. So this is what you do against a boss that is moving. So it's actually easier than you think if you look at it, but I would advise you to practice it because it took me a long time to get used to. Once you practice it and you get used to it, every boss becomes easy. And actually, this helped me land more surges. It sounds ironic, but since I have to care about getting the quick pace from Dark Axle, I'm always paying attention now to the boss. You know how like with Curse Doll you don't give any Fs, you just like stay behind the boss, even if the boss like turn around or stuff like that, you just like chase his butt and you surge. With this playstyle, you actually have to pay attention to the boss, so you can't autopilot. That's why it's harder. I think I covered everything, so especially like the most important part, which is the Dark Axle talk, since it's the core of this build. It's basically the pro and the con of the build. It's both pro and the con of the build. So basically the pros is higher damage, higher ceiling, but riskier playstyle, and you can be countered by slows. But I think that applies to any raid captain user, so you don't have to worry about that. And one of the best advantages of this build is that it's super cheap and deals more damage. So as you see, all my raid captain accessories are high spec, and that's why I could afford this kind of spec. And now I just need a better necklace. This necklace was so cheap to get, but if I have a better necklace, I can easily hit the 1700 spec mark. So imagine that I can hit 1700 spec with prices that are 10 times cheaper than the Curse Doll build. And my Curse Doll build back then costed me a kidney, and it was only like 1600. And this one is almost 1700, so almost 100 spec difference. And this is one of the best advantages of this build. Not to mention no penalty, because Curse Doll penalty is really bad, especially when you're bussing. So with this one, you have no penalty whatsoever. And now I'm done, so I'm gonna leave you and end this video with a DPS test of 2 minutes. So